Hi, welcome to episode 3 of TrueSci Cymru's COVID research series based here at Bangor University. Back in episode 1, we spoke to Davy Jones and he talked us through some of the surveillance and monitoring that's going on here at Bangor University with COVID samples throughout the UK. Since then, we've been working with the team that are conducting this research, and we've been talking to them about the laboratory processes that occur here at Bangor, how they handle the samples and what happens to these samples as they come from the wastewater plants and go through all of the different types of processing. So we've been lucky enough to get a bit of time with Kata, who is the project manager on the COVID surveillance and wastewater monitoring project. She had loads of really useful information about the way that the project is funded, how they applied for that funding, and the way that the whole project works in terms of collaborating with Welsh Government and different research partners all over Wales and also throughout the UK. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really nice for you to give us your time. Do you mind just introducing yourself and telling me a bit about what you do on the wastewater monitoring project here at Bangor University?
Yeah, with pleasure. I'm Kata Farkas. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Bangor University. Our research group mainly interested in waterborne viruses and other pathogens. But now with the COVID pandemic, we also started to work on the wastewater-based surveillance of COVID-19 at a national level, and I've been working on all those projects, mainly on project management.
You specialise in viruses and things.
Yes.
Is it just people who specialise in viruses who've been working on this project, or is it a range of different type of scientists?
Everybody works on the project, really. Microbiologists are also involved, data scientists just to do all the statistics and everything, genomics analysis for sequencing, bioinformaticians, statisticians, chemical engineers, people who are able to develop new platforms and new equipment, so all the engineering and robotics side.
Yeah. That's really interesting how all of those sciences can come together to monitor a pandemic, which I'm guessing a lot of those hadn't done anything to do with that before. Hi, thanks for joining us today and giving your time to talk a little bit about the COVID wastewater monitoring project running at Bangor University. Do you mind just introducing yourself and letting us know a little bit about your role on the project?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. My name is Ben and I am a research assistant working on the COVID wastewater monitoring project. And what me and a bunch of other people do is we have wastewater sample for sewage delivered into our lab, and we go through a couple of different stages of processing for a variety of different means to try and identify how much genetic material is present from the COVID virus, and use that as a way of measuring the level of infection rates across different parts of the country.
Okay, so the COVID samples that you collected, they come from wastewater treatment plants. How do you get them from the treatment plants, and how do they end up here at Bangor?
We have a variety of delivery services, couriers, who deliver the samples to us every morning and in the afternoon. So that's one side of it. The other side is transferred across North Wales, people who work at the sewage sites. They have special devices they can use to collect batches of the sewage, bottle that up for us, label it so we know where it's come from.
Okay, that's really interesting. So you end up with just tubs of sewage water, basically.
Yeah. Fortunately, we make sure we collect the bits that's just liquid. We don't try to include any of the solid stuff too much, because that's not the stuff that we're interested in.
And then once you've got them here, what actually happens to those samples? How do they get processed at Bangor?
The first thing we want to do is try and remove any of the large particles. Could just be things like mud, anything else that anyone puts down their drains. So the way we try and remove that is through a process of centrifugation. And what that does is it uses a device called a centrifuge. And what a centrifuge does, it's kind of like a much faster version of a washing machine. It spins round and round really, really fast, and it's a way you can separate particles based on their size. And what you want is to spin it hard and fast enough that it forms a nice solid mass at the bottom, which you call a pellet. And then there's the remaining liquid as well, and you can either use the liquid or the solid mass, depending on what you're doing in the process.
So in this context, would I be right in thinking that the solid mass you get at the bottom will be a combination of dirt, horrible things that's in our sewage, and in the liquid, that's where you've got your virus, is that right?
So the very first step is you want to keep that liquid because that's where the virus is. Often the virus isn't that, it's broken down by the time that we will have received it. So what we're largely looking for is the genetic material that lives inside.
Ben just spoke to us about using centrifuges as part of the COVID research, and I just wanted to explore a little more deeply about what a centrifuge is and how we use them in science, because centrifuges are used loads in all different areas, in sort of biology and chemistry, environmental science. What centrifuges do is we use them to separate mixtures. So a lot of liquids are actually mixtures of lots of different things. One example is our blood. Often if we're trying to detect disease in someone, we need to separate out all the different parts of that blood. And if we analyse all of the blood together, it'd be quite hard to work out what's going on because there's so many different things kind of clouding up the data. Whereas if you separate that mixture and just take the bit that you need, you can use that to tell us whether or not that person has a disease. So I'm going to kind of use this little demonstration to explain what I mean. So I've got this mixture here. There's lots of these green pebbles, and there's also bits of plastic. So there's these black ones and these grey ones as well. And I'm interested in analysing the plastic bits, but I've got this mixture and it's quite difficult to separate them. So this is where I might use something like a centrifuge. And what the centrifuge would do is the equivalent of what would happen if I pour this into some water. So as you can see here, all of the pebbles are sat at the bottom and the plastic has come up to the top. So the mixture is now really nicely separated. I can just scoop out all these bits of plastic. And then if I poured off the water, I'd have my pebbles. So the next question is, how do these centrifuges actually work? And that's all based on forces. So it's based on forces and also the weight of the different things in the mixture that you're trying to separate. So what I've got here is I've got a string with a little bit of plastic attached to the end of it, and this, I'm demonstrating the forces that are acting in our centrifuge. So in the centrifuge, things spin around like this, round and round and round and round, and what happens is the things with higher weight in your sample get pushed further to the end of the tube that you've got them in, and the stuff that's lower weight stays further up the tube. And you end up getting, it means that you end up getting kind of a solid bit at the bottom and a liquid, and so you can pipette off that liquid and get left with a solid, or use the liquid and get rid of the solid. So there's quite a confusing thing with the forces in this. You'd think, with it spinning around like this, that you'd have a force outwards in the direction of the piece of plastic to hold it there, but that's actually not true. What we've got is a force acting in the direction that the ball is spinning, so that's constantly changing the direction. So say it's like this, it will be going up in this direction if I spin it that way, and continuing in the direction of my finger, that force that's going across. And then we also have another force, and it's actually going inwards to the centre rather than outwards, which is the opposite of what you'd expect. It's called Centripetal Force. So I'm going to prove to you that there's a force acting kind of in this direction as it spins by spinning this around, and I'm going to let go when the ball is at the top of the circle, and it's not going to fly upwards as if the forces were going directly out. Instead, it's going to go that way. So you can see that ball just landed over there. So it was at the top of the arc of the circle, and instead of going up, it went directly in that direction. So the question is, how do centrifuges actually work? Well, what they do is they spin round really, really quickly, and then whatever's in your mixture, the sort of things that weigh more in that mixture move out to the outside, and the stuff that weigh less are closer and closer to the centre. So I've made a little DIY centrifuge here. These are just two tubes stuck to each other. You can make similar things with stuff at home, like small bottles, or if you've got any kind of tube where you can put a mixture of things in it and then sellotape the lids together like I've done here, and I've just used an elastic band to hold them. And this, you can see the mixtures are kind of a greeny kind of colour, and I'm going to spin this round and see what happens. So what we saw there was the two things that are making up this mixture. rather than just being this kind of green colour altogether, they actually separated into blue and yellow. And you saw that instead of sitting along this bottom, they were pushed to the edge of the tube, and you got layers about here and here. And so what's actually in here is it's water that's dyed blue and oil that's the yellow thing. What we've learned here is that for the same volume, water weighs more than the oil, because the blue water was pushed at this end, whereas the oil was further in, showing that it weighs less. We kind of know that those two things separate and that water is more dense than oil, because we know that if we just pour water in a cup and put oil in, eventually they'll settle out. And also, you can't recover anything from that. So what I mean by recover is once you finish spinning in a centrifuge, you want something to be a solid pellet at the bottom and something to be higher up, or for the layers to kind of stay the same afterwards, so that you can use that to extract your whatever you're interested in getting out. So I thought I'd show you with something that's a bit more of a mixture, that's a bit harder to separate. So in these two tubes, I've got a mixture of soil and water, so it's all a murky kind of brown colour. And I'm going to show you these being centrifuged on a little centrifuge that I've made myself, and it's something that you can make at home as well. We'll make details of how to make it at home available for you. So these tubes, you can use, these are things that I've got in the lab, but you can use any type of little tube. You can even just cut off a bit of a straw and tape up one end of it and stick them on. So first, I'm going to sellotape these onto my centrifuge, which is just here, and then I'll show you it in action. Okay, so I've now stuck my tubes to my centrifuge. So what I've got here is a disc. I've got one of the samples here and one of them here. I've just stuck them down with sellotape. And a really important thing that I've done here is I've got them opposite each other and on opposite sides of the disc. And that is because centrifuges need to be balanced. If they're not balanced, they won't work. So one example of this is if you run your washing machine, which is another thing that spins around really, really quickly. If you were to just put one item in there, something like a big heavy towel, when that washing machine gets the towel wet and makes it quite heavy and spins around loads and loads, it'll start clunking and thudding and making a really loud noise. And that's because it's spinning in an unbalanced way, and that means it doesn't spin just in one place. It will start verging off into a kind of oval instead of a circle. So it's the same for centrifuges. You can have really bad accidents in the lab if you don't balance your centrifuge. So what I've got here is a bit of fishing string going through my disc with my two samples on it. I'm first going to wind up my centrifuge, and you can follow along at home if you've made yours already, till it's really well winded up. And then if I pull, you can see it spins the sample really quickly. And we can see already there's some separation, particularly in this sample. So can you see there? At the top, you've got that solid bit of soil, and that's your solid pellet, and that's been separated out of the liquid. So if I wanted to keep that solid bit, I'd take off this liquid and put it in the bin and keep the solid bit, or otherwise I'd just take the liquid off and use that if that was the bit that I was interested in. And this is exactly what they do in their COVID research. For example, at the first step, when they've got sewage water and they want to look at the amount of virus in it, but it is all full of sludge and poo and dirt and loads of horrible things, they basically do that to it, and that takes all of that nasty stuff out, and they're able to just have much cleaner liquid to work with. So then once you've got that liquid and it's got your virus in it, how do you find your virus? Because I'm assuming you're going to want to look for it inside the sample.
So because viruses are very, very small, normal centrifugation doesn't really work as you'd like it to. So we add a certain chemical into that liquid and incubate that sample in the fridge from an hour to overnight. And what that does is allows the genetic material or the virus that is present to bind to that chemical, and then we can repeat the centrifugation, and that allows us to bring down the virus into a solid mass, which we can then use for detection.
So you put a chemical in which sticks to your virus, and that makes it really heavy, and suddenly you can centrifuge it out.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really interesting then. So what's next for our little lump of heavy virus?
Yeah, so unfortunately not just viruses and the genetic material they contain can be brought down in this way. Certain impurities, other things that we're not really interested in can be brought down in this process as well. So what we do is the nucleic acid extraction. And essentially what this is the genetic material, which is called RNA in this COVID virus. We essentially bind it to these very, very small magnetic beads, and we put it through a series of washes. So we use different chemical formulations to wash these beads that are bound to that genetic material. And after these washes, we then can separate the beads from the genetic material, and that's what we can use to detect the COVID virus.
So you say that the RNA binds to the magnetic beads. Is that because the RNA is magnetic? Or how
No, it's not that the RNA is magnetic. It's the chemical properties of both the beads and the RNA, and also the surrounding liquids create an environment which is conducive for the RNA to bind to the beads and stick there throughout this washing process.
Okay, so then the beads being magnetic, is that so you can take them out?
Yeah, so that's so that we can keep hold of them.
So that means everything else gets washed away.
Exactly.
What you've got that you want stays stuck to your lovely magnet.
Yeah, and it should hopefully be nice and pure.
Okay, so now we've got our RNA.
Yep.
What can we do with that? What happens next?
So the next step is to put that into something called PCR. Now PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction, to artificially increase the amount of the genetic material within a sample. So we add in the sample that we've purified through all this processing, a specific enzyme, and a variety of other compounds, some of which are able to fluoresce and generate specific light. And by putting that into what's called a PCR machine, we are able to then artificially increase the level of the genetic material that we're interested in.
That sounds really interesting, and I've seen in your labs that you've got a lot of big robots doing this job, which look really cool. So does that, I'm guessing that's because you've got so many samples, you don't have the manpower to all be doing these kind of reactions that take quite a long time.
Yeah.
So you've invested in a bunch of cool looking robot cubes.
Yeah, yeah.
PCR neu polymerase chain reaction yw'r broses lle mae DNA yn cael ei gopio'n synthetig i'w astudio. Da ni'n iwsio hwn mewn gwyddoniaeth forensic, genetic, ond hefyd i brofi glefydau viral fel y coronavirus. Mae yna tair cam i hyn: dadnaturiaethiad, aneiladu ac estyniad. Dyma esboniad cyflym o'r tair cam yna. Dadnaturiaethiad yw gwahanu'r llinellau DNA gan ddefnyddio tymereddau uchel dros 90 gradd. Mae tymeredd uchel yn torri'r llinynau DNA ar wahân. Aneiliadu ydy pan fydd y rhan berthnasol o DNA wedi marcio. Mae primyddion wedi cynnwys yn y gymysgedd adweithio, ac ar dymheredd o gwmpas 60 gradd, maent yn rhwymo i'r llinynau'n DNA ar gychwyn y darn perthnasol. Y cam olaf, estyniad, yw lle mae DNA yn cael ei ail-greu. Mae hyn yn digwydd am 70 gradd, gyda chymorth catalydd naturiol, enzyme o'r enw Taq polymerase. Mae'r enzyme hwn yn rhwymo'r basau yn y gymysgedd adweithio i'r llinyn DNA, gan greu copi o'r sampl DNA wreiddiol. Gellir otomeiddio'r broses hon gan defnyddio cylchredwr thermal ac, ar ôl gadael dros nos, mae'n creu biliynau o gopïau i'w hadnabod neu ymchwilio.
You said you've got a lot of samples coming through. Do you know roughly how many samples you're processing every day?
Well, if you ask me again tomorrow, I could probably tell you a different number because it's increasing all the time at the moment, but approximately I think we're going through about 300 samples a week.
300 samples a week, that's a lot.
Current plans, to my knowledge, we're potentially going to try and increase that to about 900 samples a week. So we're really sort of ramping up and trying to increase our ability to put samples through our process.
Sounds like it's a good job you've got so many robots on board then.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of robots, definitely needed.
Yeah. Another question, so obviously you're actually working with samples in the lab that have got COVID-19 in them. Surely that's got to be quite dangerous for you.
Surprisingly not, actually. Sewage in itself in a lab isn't considered too dangerous. Obviously it's not particularly pleasant to have to deal with, because there's a variety of bacteria and other viruses that could probably live in there as well. But specifically for the COVID virus, coronavirus, we largely think that by the time that the samples come into our lab, any sort of infectious virus that can infect us has largely been broken down. So what we are trying to purify from these samples and detect is just the genetic material, which doesn't pose a threat to us or anyone else in the surrounding community.
Are there any things that you do in the lab to sort of stop yourself from catching COVID from the samples, or do you just assume that it's all?
Well, I think the main thing is obviously not to drink the samples, because it's not great.
As tempting as it might be.
Yeah. So obviously when we're working with sewage, you want to make sure we're protected from the sewage. It's not necessarily the nicest thing in the world to be working with. So one of the ways we do this is we wear 2 sets of gloves. The first set of gloves, we take down to the cups of our lab trips like this, and this is just the way we try to help protect ourselves from the sewage. And then on top of this goes another set of gloves as well, and that's to make sure our hands are completely protected when we're working with the sewage.
So when you're in the labs, you're handling these samples, you're moving them around a lot, they're going through lots of different machines which have to be used in really specific ways. What happens if you make a mistake in the lab?
Yeah, so we try and avoid making mistakes in the lab, and we put a lot of effort into trying to simplify things as much as possible to avoid those mistakes. But I think mistakes happen in life. Like whilst we work in a lab, whilst there are some very intelligent people working on this project, we are still just normal human beings. We do make mistakes and things do go wrong. If for some reason we can't process a sample, it doesn't necessarily matter too much. And also when we receive samples, we often don't use all of the samples, and we keep hold of them for 24-48 hours after the fact. So if something does go wrong in the process, we do have a little bit of a fail-safe so that we can start again.
So I guess you've got to get that balance of knowing whether it's worth starting again or whether to just say, actually, I've made a mistake, doesn't matter, I'll just leave it.
Yeah, the important thing in science is that mistakes are made, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so that was really interesting speaking with Ben. One thing that I found particularly interesting was how they spin the samples down in the centrifuge to get rid of all of the poo and all the dirt, and then when they just have the virus in the liquid, they're able to use a chemical that specifically sticks to that virus so that they can spin it down again and extract just the virus from those samples. And so we've spoken to Ben about the processes and what happens in your labs, and I was just wondering, so you've got all this data about how much COVID there is in Wales. What happens with that data? What do you use it for?
So we collect the data, and then data scientists try and see how well it correlates with case numbers that we know of, and how best to use the data. Also how to normalize the data, because it can vary, the virus concentration can vary, there's a lot of brain, the concentration of the virus will be lower, and so on. So just to validate and normalize all that data, and then we can align that with case numbers, and that can be feed into policy making as well, and to understand which areas are more affected by the virus than others, and then see how the lockdown measures need to be applied or lifted.
Okay, so this stuff feeds directly into Welsh Government, and once we've worked out how good the data is, that gives them some information to work with when they're deciding about things like lockdowns, which restrictions to get rid of or which ones to bring in, that kind of thing.
Yes, it definitely goes into that consideration.
So this group's having direct impacts on what's going on in Wales then, and giving really useful information to the government. So I don't know about you, but I found it really interesting working with the COVID wastewater monitoring team here at Bangor University. I've really enjoyed asking them lots of questions and understanding more about this project. That's it from us today. We are present on social media, so we are on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook. Our Twitter handle is @TrioSciBangor. If you've got any questions about this episode, any episode of the series, or any general questions about science, it'd be really cool if you could get in touch with us via our social media. Or if there's any ideas that you have about episodes that you'd like to see in the future, it would be great to hear from you. Thanks very much.